Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's your boy, Delightful Kiss Boy, and tonight I'm going to be talking about dreams because why not? I'm interested in dreams. You go to sleep, your brain plays a movie for you to watch, basically to be in. You're kind of the star of a movie every night, and then you wake up, and half the time you can't remember what the hell happened. It's like it's like a crazy night out. You're just like, wow, something interesting must have happened last night, but I can't remember quite what. But yeah, I think that like dreams are kind of the closest thing that you get to real life magic in a certain way, especially when you start talking about lucid dreaming. So lucid dreaming, for those who don't know, it's when you realize you're dreaming in your dream, and then you become like you're able to essentially control yourself in your dream, and if after you get better at it, other aspects of your dream as well. Now, I've been interested in lucid dreaming for quite a while, but I've kind of like gone through periods where I've been trying to do it, and then had some mild successes, and then I stopped doing it, and yada yada yada. So I want to start off by just talking about lucid dreaming and some ways that you can induce it. So essentially, it's really cool when you become lucid because you kind of end up like, for lack of a better like metaphor, you're kind of like Neo in the Matrix or whatever when he realizes that he can control everything. It's kind of a lame metaphor, to be honest, and super dated at this point, but it's kind of what I mean. I don't know. That's the most apt comparison, I would say. So there are kind of ways that you can induce it more easily, essentially. And one of the ways that people talk about doing that never really worked for me was using tells, all right? Or establishing a habit that when you're in the dream will signal to you that you're in a dream. But these never really worked for me. I think one of the most common ones is like getting into the habit of checking your watch like multiple times back to back. Because apparently, if you're in a dream, oftentimes the time will not be consistent. So you'll check your watch once, and you'll check it again, and then when you check it again, then you'll see that like the time is different or something like that. Or maybe time hasn't passed or something, right? And so people do that in their normal day-to-day life to get a habit established so that when they're in their dream, hopefully their dream selves will also be, uptaking the habit, and then you'll be able to notice, oh wait, this isn't working the way that it should work, I must be in a dream. So there's things like that. There's other things as well. I think there's just like checking clocks and stuff like that. But once again, this never really worked for me. I didn't really try super hard at it, to be fair. But I can just tell you that there's like so many things that are going on in the dream that like are way more ridiculous than, checking your watch twice and having it be, different times, that I don't think that would work for me, Like half the time you look away from somebody and look back and they're a completely different person, and I don't notice I'm in a dream. You know what I mean? So there's that. I think other people were saying that like they'll pick up books and they'll try to read books because like oftentimes in a dream you'll open up a book and like the writing will be illegible, so then you're like, okay, I'm in a dream. But the problem is that if I do that in a dream, there's text there. I don't know if it makes any sense, but like for me there's usually text there. I don't know. It's like so none of that shit really worked for me. The thing that really worked for me but made it less sustainable was this thing called the awake back to bed technique. Now this would happen accidentally oftentimes, where you kind of like, I would wake up at like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 a.m. before I was going to be getting up, and I'd have to like go to the bathroom and then I'd go back to sleep. The thing is that when you go back to sleep after you've slept for a long time, for whatever reason, you're more prone, or at least most people, including myself, are more prone to having a lucid dream. And this worked like pretty damn well if I did it. So for a while I was doing it intentionally, where I was setting an alarm like an hour before I would be getting up, or earlier. It takes me a long time to fall asleep, so I'd have to do it earlier. This is why it's not very sustainable for me. But I would do that, and then I would go to sleep, and I would be much more likely to have a lucid dream. Now, the other thing that you got to keep in mind with all this stuff, if you want to start lucid dreaming, by the way, is that you should start keeping a dream journal, okay? And the reason you're doing this is because you're going to train yourself to remember your dreams. Like, when people say, oh, I didn't have any dream last night, you almost certainly did, but you just can't remember it. And so what ends up happening, for whatever reason, it's very odd. There's weird dream rules, But basically, when you wake up, the more that you do before you try to recall what your dream was, unless it was like a super vivid dream, the more likely you are to forget it or forget key details. I don't know why that is, but that's 100% true. So if you train yourself to every morning, as soon as you wake up, think, what did I dream about? And then write it down in a dream journal. And try to, basically, before you do anything, just try to remember everything that happened in all of your dreams. You just keep doing that, no matter how mundane it is, right? You just get in the habit of doing this. Then you're going to basically dream every night, quote unquote, even though you're already doing that. It's just now you can remember it. Because oftentimes you probably are having lucid dreams, you just might not remember them. Although I will say that lucid dreams are probably more memorable than the passive ones, right? In any case, so if you want to do it, I'd say, you can look into tells. It never really worked for me, but it works for a lot of people, supposedly. You can do the awake back to bed technique, where you basically set an alarm, wake up a little early, and then go back to sleep. And then for whatever reason, you're more likely to have a lucid dream. And then on top of that, you can keep, dream journaling so that you can recall your dreams better. On top of that, dream journaling is just going to make it so that you're more cognizant of dreams. So, like, for example, I think I lucid dreamed more when I was focused on lucid dreaming in general, just because I was thinking about it more. So once you have all that done, what happens when you actually are lucid dreaming? Because for me, I was never able to get as crazy results as what I would read about online necessarily, because oftentimes I would just get like a little bit too excited. And like, I don't know, I mean, you're basically in this, it's almost like a simulated world, like in your brain. It's like you're in some sort of a setting that your brain is like imagining for you. And there's like, it's really bizarre when you become lucid, because it's like, there's, it's like you have your vision, but on top of that, there's also legitimately, it feels like you can feel certain things. I've never felt pain directly in a dream, but I've like felt tactile things. Like, I'll give you an example. There's one lucid dream that I had that I like became lucid when I was on vacation at this cabin that I'd gone to with my family growing up. All right. And I remember like I was sitting on some sort of like stone stack or something like that. It was kind of like a stone pillar thing. And I remember it was covered in moss, and I reached down to touch the moss, and it was really bizarre. It didn't feel like what real moss feels like. It felt like what I would imagine if you had like created like roots or something like that out of silicone or something. Like, that's what it felt like, when I was just feeling it in my dream. And I felt like I could really feel it. But once again, like, if I've done things that would cause me pain in real life in my dreams, and I've never felt pain, I'm sure it's possible, to simulate it. I mean, I think that like, oftentimes, like, I would do things and I would understand it's painful in my dream, but it wouldn't like actually, I wouldn't experience the sensation. Okay. So there's that. And then on top of that, but the other part of it is like I said, I had a trouble like controlling the dream, or like early on, it was like I had trouble like holding the world together. There's no other way to explain it other than that. Like, I would become lucid. I remember the first time that I remember distinctly becoming lucid, except for like, I don't know, there've been a few one-offs when I was growing up, but when I was consciously trying to do it, right? I was in the carport at my parents' house, and I was standing out there, and it was like afternoon, and I realized I was in a dream, and so got really excited. And I remember, like, I was like, oh man, okay, what do I do? What do I do? I got to control things and do all sorts of shit. And I remember, like, I, like, zoomed out into a third-person perspective of me, and I looked like a little silhouette. And I jumped up in the air and did, like, a heel click, and I zoomed back into my perspective, my own first-person perspective, and then I fell through the ground like I was no-clipping in a video game, or, like, you know, clipped through the ground, and then I woke up, and I was like, God damn it. I got so excited, and I was psyching myself out thinking that I had to, like, hold the world together or something, that it just, like, completely fell apart, and then I woke up. And that's kind of what happened a lot. It wasn't necessarily that the world was falling apart like that, but it was more just like, I would get excited because I was lucid, and then I would wake up. And I never was able to fully kind of get over that, but I had some interesting experiences lucid dreaming, all right? Like, I'll give you an example. One of the ones that was more cool, it was actually from that same one I was talking about at that cabin, is I was, like, outside, and then I ended up going inside, and at a certain point, I don't know if this was, like... So people have talked about this, other people having experiences like this. So I can't, you know, for sure say that this wasn't just part of the dream I was having, but it felt like what people were describing happens to them, and it's an interesting phenomenon. All right, so basically what happened was I was inside the cabin, and I started to notice that, like, everything around me at a certain point started kind of fading and becoming less and less detailed, and I was like, what is going on? It was like, because I was lucid, and then it was like everything just starts to, like, get to, like, a lower definition, and then it started to fade out, and it was like my vision was narrowing and narrowing kind of into this little circle, and everything was going black, right? And then I saw something start fading in slowly, and then I was in a new setting, and then once again I got too excited and I woke up. And so, once again, that could have just been part of the dream that I was having and I didn't know what was going on. But people have described the same kind of experience, and the way that they explain it is that that's like, you know how, like, when you go to sleep, you'll, like, or if you have a dream, right? Oftentimes it'll be like a sequence of unrelated sort of events that you're remembering. And you don't quite remember how you got there, but you just, you know, all of us, you're in one dream, and then it seems like you're in a completely different dream. And so the explanation that people have is that is experiencing, basically transitioning from one dream to another dream, and you're essentially writing that process out. And that's what it felt like to me. And I don't know if that's for sure what was going on, you know? There's a lot of pseudoscience and shit when it comes to dreams, by the way. I don't really take people's explanations super seriously, but that is what it felt like. So regardless of whether that's true or not, I thought it was a very cool experience. So there was that. I remember another time I became lucid in a dream where I was like, this was around the time I was learning to drive in high school, and I was in the car driving with my dad in the passenger seat in my dream, and then I realized I'm in a dream, and so I just started flooring it, and then my dad started freaking out, and then I woke up. Because I got too excited once again. I was like, hell yeah, let's go. Yeah, those are the main lucid dreams I remember. I never was able to really do anything substantial in them, but I remember the feeling was very cool. And I want to go back and try to revisit it and try to, like, have a full-on lucid dream. I think, especially because I can do the awake back-to-bed technique when I'm unemployed for this year. Pretty consequence-free, right? It should be interesting. But anyway, I spent enough time talking about lucid dreams. I just think lucid dreaming is really cool. I just want to talk about dreaming in general, though, because I think they're just so interesting and cool. And I'm not, like, I don't believe the whole... There's, like, once again, a lot of pseudoscience, I think, when it comes to dreams, in my opinion, where people kind of tie them to spirituality, which I'm not really buying necessarily, you know? And on top of that, there's kind of this universal symbolism sort of an angle that a lot of people take when it comes to dreams, where they say, oh, this is what this means, you know? This is what this means for you because you saw a butterfly in your dream. That means this. And it's like, that I do not believe in at all. I think that there's some obvious themes that a lot of people will have in certain dreams. Like, for example, if you're having a nightmare about something that you're stressed out about, or is, you know, a fear that's constantly with you, it's pretty obvious what the meaning of that dream is. It's that you're stressed the fuck out about, you know, missing class or missing a test or forgetting to turn in an assignment or, you know, whatever, any number of things. Making yourself look like a fool in front of your crush, you know, that sort of shit, you know? That shit, I buy the explanations there because it's pretty obvious. The things I don't buy is like saying, oh, that dream you told me about, that wolf that you saw represents this because universally wolves represent this thing. I don't think that that's true at all, right? I think that sort of thing is subjective. Basically, everybody has, you know, their own personal experiences. Their brains are concocting these scenarios and tying together these different ideas in weird ways, weird unexpected ways. And I don't think that you can go ahead and say, this thing that you see in your dream is the same in this context as this other person's dream, you know, when they see the same thing in a completely different context. People have their own unique ways of connecting things, you know? And so I think you have to, if you can look into what dreams mean on a certain level, but it's going to be unique to the individual. I don't believe in the universal symbolism beyond a certain point. I mean, there's cultural norms and shit like that, yada, 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 but I don't buy it. On top of that, what I think that is really useful about kind of journaling with dreams is that I think that so as an adult, let me just kind of give an example of like where I'm thinking about this from. I haven't really put this into words yet. When you're a kid, at least with my experience, I would spend way more time just kind of daydreaming and thinking up weird scenarios. I would spend hours like in my backyard as a kid, swinging on a swing, thinking up stories and scenarios just for the sake of thinking about things and like imagining. And I was just a much more imaginative kid. And I think that I had a lot more strange ideas back then because I was like, I just thought I was interested in things in a different way than I am now. And I don't know, I would just have these weird scenarios. Like I remember having daydreams about going into my backyard and being able to go into this secret kind of pocket dimension where I could go in and get strapped. Sometimes it was a pocket dimension. Sometimes it would be going into a base where there was a machine that would basically simulate things going on in my head so that I could like live out a lifetime in this alternate reality and then be back in time for dinner with like my parents or some shit. And I'd have these weird ideas about these cities that would have these like beyond these coasts, but there's these like giant sea monsters, and there'd be this shield that would prevent the sea monsters from getting in. So there'd just be these giant like krakens trying to break these shields, but everybody was chilling and stuff. And so I just had these like imaginative ideas as a young kid. And I think that when you're dreaming, you kind of sometimes get back to that sort of childlike creativity, because what it does, it's like your brain is connecting things that you normally wouldn't connect oftentimes. You know what I mean? It's putting pieces together in a way that's just very whimsical. And I think that it's useful to kind of tap back into that sort of creativity, especially if you're trying to do anything creative like art or just any, writing, anything. It you don't even need to be generating anything from it. I think for me personally, it's just beneficial to kind of try to tap into that sort of creativity again in whatever way that I can. I'll give you an example. Like I had a dream a few days ago. I've started recently journaling, where basically I imagined I was at some sort of, I don't know, I was thinking it was in a house, but there was like this view of this big hillside, and there was this like big wooden robot that was kind of like in the it had like a torso that was sticking out of this like crate or this box, and what it was doing is we were watching it drag itself up this hill, and it was just going all the way to the top, and then when it got to the top it would slide down the other side, and we like I think I just teleported to the other side, you know, dream logic, and I saw that it was like sliding down the hill, and then as it was descending, it's like base transformed into this like bicycle. And so it started like bicycling down the hill, and then it would use that momentum to like swing around and then take this side road and get back to the front of the hill again, and then start climbing back up. And it was really cool. It was really cool imagery for me that was like, you know, this robot made completely of like, it was this dark, like walnut kind of a color. And I was just like, that's fucking awesome. You know, that's not something that I would just think about in my day-to-day life, because usually as an adult, when I'm thinking about something, right, I'm thinking about it for having like a purpose. And that really is like a foil to creativity, I feel like, you know? Like if I'll think about, I'll have creative endeavors where I'm like thinking of a story maybe, right? But you're doing it for like a purpose. And oftentimes like I'm thinking about what's the message of the story that I'm going to tell, you know? It's like, I'm not just thinking about, what if there was a sick fucking robot that was made of wood that drags itself up a hill and turns into a bicycle? You know, it's like, that shit's sick. And when I saw it, I was like, that's fucking awesome. And I wrote it down. I was excited because I'm like, that's a sick idea, you know? When would I ever think of that for anything? Because it's not a useful thing to think about, but it's a cool thing to think about. And I think that I don't know, I want to integrate it maybe sometime in some sort of creative thing. I don't know. Maybe I'll try to animate it in Blender or something. You know, who knows? But like, I think that sort of shit results in really cool outcomes when you start to try to incorporate and take inspiration from those sorts of ideas. I mean, you look at certain games that I think are great and awesome, and I love the vibe of them. Things that come to mind. LSD Dream Emulator, obviously. I mean, obviously that game has some... It's very quirky, you know, but I think that game's really cool. And in the same kind of vein, Yume Nikki is an indie game that you can play for free. I played it a little bit. Actually, you know, I should do a playthrough of Yume Nikki on my second channel, because I didn't get like very far in it. I think I watched some gameplay from other people, or maybe I just checked out different worlds in the game, but I don't think I ever tried to find all of the different items. But very odd game. It's just kind of more about wandering through this dreamlike world that's kind of uncanny, you know? So there's that sort of thing. There's plenty of these types of games. Like I know I watch Vinesauce, like Vinny. He plays a lot of games that are inspired by dreams. I think that honestly, the whole liminal space thing, I think it's a nostalgia thing. I think it's this uncanniness thing, but I also think that it's kind of this dreamlike thing. You look at a lot of the settings that are popular in kind of this liminal space phenomenon, and they all feel very dreamlike, you know? Because oftentimes, like I was saying, you know, it's like you're connecting ideas in strange ways, and oftentimes your brain will go back to ideas from your childhood, and you'll end up kind of reliving certain childhood scenarios. And I don't know, I think it's all interesting. I think other media that takes inspiration from like nightmares, for example, I mean a lot of horror stuff, but something that really comes to mind is a movie like Skinamarink, which is a movie that I liked it. I don't know if I enjoyed it. That's what I would say. But that movie to me feels like the experience of having a fever dream. Specifically like when you have a fever and you're not quite asleep, but you're not quite awake, and your brain just goes to mush and you feel like you're stuck. That's what that movie felt like to me. And it was like for the entire runtime, basically. And I thought it captured that vibe very well, you know? But yeah, I don't know. I think that, I think dreams are really cool. I'm going to give you some examples of some notable dreams that I've had throughout my life. I remember some from when I was a kid. Those are probably the more noteworthy ones. I remember, well, noteworthy because I've remembered them for so long. One of the ones that was most vivid in my head is, it kind of took inspiration from this video I mentioned earlier that I was obsessed with as a kid, which was The Mind's Eye, which were these weird 3D animated, kind of 3D animated videos with like a musical backing track that were released to VHS in the 90s. I don't know, my parents bought them and I was obsessed with them. And I would watch them over and over and over again. But what essentially the dream was, it was kind of a nightmare almost, but I've always thought it was very cool. I kind of like nightmares, especially now that I'm a horror fan, you know. But basically, I was in my backyard at my childhood home, and I was with, like, my dad or something like that, or somebody out back in the backyard. What we were doing is we were taking these, like, wooden rectangular blocks that were kind of like just plain blocks, and we would roll them up this hill, and then they would just roll back down. It was very, you know, very cool stuff. But then I turned around, and there was what looked like, similar to this interesting statue from The Mind's Eye. It was this giant statue standing in my backyard, and I'm remembering it as this kind of like, so it was in my backyard, and the lighting was very like bleached looking, and it kind of reminded me of like what an analog horror thing from today would look like, but the exposure was like way up. All right, so it wasn't like super dark, but it was like very like washed out looking, and it's this big statue that's got this bizarre face and like this twisting kind of abdomen thing, and it had these legs, and specifically I remember it had no arms, and I was terrified of it. I saw it and I was like, oh my fucking god, that is horrifying. And it was huge. It was probably like 12 feet tall, right, and really wide. And I was like, oh my god. And the next thing I remember was, what I did is I was trying to escape from it because I understood that it was dangerous, and so I went and hid. We had this crawl space under this house, but it was just kind of like, it was literally a crawl space. So what you'd do is you'd kind of pull this wooden covering off of the crawl space area, and you'd get down into this, you know, thing. I mean, I think most people's, my parents' house now, they have like a walk-in crawl space. It's not really crawl space, but you'd lift up this wooden thing, and then you kind of have access to underneath the house. And so I remember I jumped into that, and I was hiding down there. And I remember, once again, the statue had no arms. I remember laying down in the crawl space, looking up, and I saw the statue's hand reach over and start grabbing me in the fucking crawl space. And then I woke up. And of course I realized the statue didn't have any hands or arms, but in the dream he both did and didn't. You know, it's like classic dream logic. And that one has stuck with me forever. And it's very cool. It's a very cool dream, I thought. So there's that one. Another noteworthy dream was that I've always remembered is I was at my childhood home once again, and all of the lighting was this deep purple and dark green. That was kind of what the lighting was like in the house. And I'm walking around, and I walk into my living room, and there's one of those, like, I don't remember which like insurance company it was or whatever, but whatever company had the talking cars that had like the eyes as headlights, or headlights for eyes, you know, that sort of shit. I'll put a picture up so that you can see what I'm talking about. But one of those was like sitting in my living room, like smiling at me, which is kind of creepy, but in the dream context, it wasn't creepy. I just thought it was like cool or something. And there was some sort of like mountain sculpture in the corner where the TV used to be. And I walked out in the front lawn, and I noticed that the street was filled with felt tip pens. So it's like the street in front of my house looked normal, except the lighting is all purple and green, and the entire street is full up to the sidewalk with just these felt tip pens. Because like when I was growing up, we had these kind of like, we had a bunch of these different scratchy felt pens, like cheapo pens that my parents got us, and we kind of put it in this big bucket. And so it was kind of like strewn about like that, and just all these pens. And I look up, and the sky is a completely, it was like we had this paper lamp kind of thing, you know, like Japanese paper lanterns, but we had this one like lampshade for one of our lamps that was kind of this big paper ball thing. I don't know why, but it was like that texture over the entire sky, and there were these shadows of various insects, like giant ants and shit, climbing along like leaves, and the shadows were being cast onto this like paper lantern sky. And then I thought that was kind of freaky, and then I woke up. And I just thought that visual was very interesting and bizarre. The pens in the street, you know, that's one thing, but like looking up and having the entire sky, when it's kind of like this dark, deep purple lighting, and seeing these shadows of insects, very striking imagery that stuck with me, you know? So there was that. I've had some more interesting dreams recently. Like, one of the ones that I just think it was so, like, unnerving. And it happened like a few years ago. This one I just thought was awesome, because I'm like, man, that is such a bizarre, like kind of funny, but very creepy concept. All right, so essentially what happened is, like, I used to go to these Sunday dinners at my grandma's house, you know? So I go over to her place, and like we have a ton of family there. It wasn't just like my aunts and uncles and my, you know, whatever. It was like my extended family's all over there. And we're in the living room, and we're sitting in a circle, and it's like normal, like family reunion style stuff. But there's this one thing that is so disconcerting, all right, about what's going on. There's basically like this Silent Hill creature that's like this fucking mummy thing that has this horrible mouth that's like has these awful teeth. Like I'm remembering it like looking like Silent Hill, a Silent Hill creature with like the mouth from the Mouth of Sauron or whatever. And that's kind of what it looked like. And it was sitting in the circle with all of us next to like one of my great uncles or some shit. I remember it was my great aunt, I think. And it's sitting there, and it's just grinning. And everybody else is, you know, talking as if it's a normal thing. And I'm just noticing this thing, like, what the fuck is that? You know? And I'm sitting there, and it's like, it becomes apparent that this is like a pet. This is like a pet to my great aunt. And what they were doing is like, they were kind of teasing it like you would a dog. And so what they'd do is they'd start putting their hand in front of its face, and it would start to like, it was like making these noises like, ah, and it would start to like open its mouth and start reaching out to like bite at their hand. And then they'd pull their hand away as it like started nipping at them. You know, it's this, once again, this Silent Hill creature. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then like, they kept doing that, and they were laughing, you know, they thought it was this funny thing. And then it like, it just gets up and it starts mauling somebody, like biting them. And everybody is still like kind of laughing, but everybody starts running out of the house. But they're like, it's kind of this interesting, like, ooh, like, you know, somebody's gonna get in trouble kind of a vibe, rather than people actually flipping out when this monster is mauling one of my relatives. And we're like, oh my God, that's so crazy, you know, or whatever. It was just this bizarre dream, and I woke up. That one was so interesting and weird, and I was like, man, it's like it was kind of nightmarish, obviously, but it was just, the whole vibe was so bizarre, and that one really stuck with me. So, in any case, I could tell you about other dreams that I've had, but I could go on forever. The main thing I want to talk about, though, is it's just such an interesting thing to see how your brain connects not unrelated, but just like connects things in a way that you wouldn't normally do in your conscious day-to-day life. And I mean, oftentimes it's going to create complete nonsense, but sometimes you get this really striking imagery that you would just never think of, or these interesting ideas. And I've been getting into Obsidian, all right? I was watching this video, and somebody was talking about kind of how you should take notes in Obsidian or whatever. And he was talking about how it's like, you want to note down your own connections that you draw between things, right? You don't want to just, replicate what you're taking notes on. You want to note down your own ideas. And I think the way you put it was that, like, when you're connecting two things and then putting your own ideas onto it, you're kind of creating knowledge, which I thought was like an interesting thing. It reminds me, the way you put it reminds me of those fucking like alchemy games where you're combining different elements and then creating new elements. That's kind of what I was envisioning in my head, especially with how Obsidian starts connecting things. But it's kind of true, And so when you're dreaming, it's kind of like your brain is like combining things that aren't usually combined and creating something new for you. And if you start to like note it down, you just get these ideas for free, And what I want to do is I want to use it as inspiration to kind of get back to that sort of daydreaming that I used to do as a kid, where I'm just trying to imagine fantastical things for the sake of imagining fantastical things, because I think that like there's a lot of inspiration to be found in that sort of realm of thinking, I think, Especially, I don't know, I just want to be kind of more creative. I kind of want to start trying to write some stuff. I want to maybe get back into like animation, Blender, that sort of stuff, even though I'm not very good at it, but I just think it'd be fun to dink around with. And so, I don't know. I think that it's going to be a lot of fun trying to get back into dreaming, man. I mean, noting things down and lucid dreaming and all that sort of stuff. I'm just trying to be more creative, etc., etc. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know some of your wackiest dreams down below, what your thoughts are on dreaming. If you have anything interesting to chime in with, I'm all ears. But this was fun yapping, and I wish you all a good night. I'm going to go sleep, and I'm going to dream some weird dreams, hopefully, and write them down in the morning. So have a good one, y'all. Bye-bye.